Hey guys, Keith here. Okay, so this is my second of my videos covering the updates between 2018.1 and 2018.6. This one I'm going to spend time on the changes in xLights, so you can get a feeling for the sorts of things that have been introduced. And as usual, I'll start with the oldest changes first. And in January, when 2008.1 came out, Kevin Mojek introduced his first changes into xLights. I think they were his first ones, may have been his second, but anyway. So the first one he introduced was the ability to save the layout image. So what this is if you're in your layout panel, you can come in here and you can save the layout image, and you can save it to your layout, to your show folder. And if I go to my show folder, go to layout, it's basically saved a copy of that image file, which I can again go and do whatever it is that I want to do with. Maybe I want to doodle on it, label some things or whatever. So you can do that using your favorite program. You can also directly print it, and this will directly print it to the printer. The only disadvantage at the moment is that it basically prints it as is, so this will come out very black, use up a lot of toner, but it will print. So you could take it into your image editor and edit it before then. So that's that one. Adding the matrix face dialog to try and fill things in automatically. So this has been a little bit superseded by some of the more recent features around faces. Basically what this is when you're in a matrix here and you're defining some faces, and you go and you add a new one, no matter what we call it, and you go to the matrix face. Let's imagine that we're not going to download them, but we're actually going to manually select them. So when you would double click here, you would go into your faces folder. I'll go into my downloaded ones now that they're all there, and I'll just choose one randomly. And what it does is you notice that instead of just populating the one, it used some smarts around noticing the file name, and it managed to work out what all of the other file names were. Now, there are limitations to this. It does its best based on some common patterns of some file names. It assumes that they're all very, very similar, and that really the only differences between the file names are the phenomes. And based on that, it pre-populates everything. Now, if you only have 4 of them there, it'll populate the 4 that it can match. If 2 have got some other strange name, then it will just populate the 2 of them, and you can still go in and manually map the others if you so wanted to. So it just saves you a whole bunch of double clicking and selecting of files. But like I say, it's somewhat superseded by the fact that you can largely download a huge number of faces now using the Facedown Loading tool. Displaying the node number relative to the string in the node layout. Okay, you probably never even noticed this, but someone did, and so it's come up. So in the node layout, you can see that there's actually 4 strings here: string 1, string 2, string 3, and string 4 in these arches. It used to not actually number the things this way. So it would go node 1 on string 1 through to here, and then it would come up to here and it would say string 2, but instead of saying node 1, it would say node 25, and so on up. And now it's more accurately representing those nodes as the nodes within the string, which I think is a little bit clearer. Definitely none of us could think of why it was the other way, so we changed it. Add create group of models by right-clicking on the layout. Sometimes the models that you want to put into the group are actually neatly in one area. Not really on my house, but what the hell? I don't know. Let's do it. Let's do it this way. Let's say I wanted to create a group which is the right-hand side of my house. I can select all the models, right-click here, say create a group. I can call it the right side. and it has created a group called right side, and it's pre-populated it with all the models that I'd already selected. Like I said, on a busy house like mine, probably not that useful because, you know, for instance, if I wanted to grab my snowflakes, it might be possible, I guess, but it's kind of difficult. Yeah, I didn't quite see. I managed to pick up these icicles, and so, yeah, a little bit difficult. So a little bit difficult, but if your house is more spread out, it's a slightly quicker way to create groups. Bulk editing of controllers. So, yeah, so this is interesting. Every now and then, there are some settings down here that it would be kind of nice to be able to bulk edit. So one of them is dimming curves, which you can go in and set for each model, but you can't set them for a whole bunch at once. But now if you right click on here, you can go into bulk edit and you can bring up the dimming curves, and you can define a, you know, a brightness dimming curve of -50 and click OK. And it's gone in and it's actually updated the dimming curve of all those selected models to -50. So if you want to set your whole display to 50% brightness, you just select all the models and do a bulk edit and you're done. You can also set the controller connection. So again, you can select all the models that are connected to one port on your controller, update them all at once. And you can also map everything to a preview. So if I was in my unassigned preview, I could grab all of these things up here, right click, bulk edit. Which preview do I want them in? Let's go and put them back in the default preview. I go back to my default preview and there they all are. So just a quick way to move multiple things around. The WRGB 4-channel node type. Look, we had one user who was down here in their string properties. They had a 4-channel tree. But we only supported RGBW, and apparently he'd found some sort of strings which were WRGB and wanted it to be that way. And so I believe Dan added that to give them that option. But that's 4 channels only. It's not 4 channels per pixel. If you listen to the xSchedule video I just released covering the same version 1 through 6 in 2018, I'll talk in there about a feature which would enable you to actually take a bunch of 3-channel data and expand it out for 4-channel pixels. So that's all available over there. And we've covered the print layout menu. So that's all the changes that were in .1. So going on to .2, the download of vendor custom models from licensed vendors. I've covered this before. I'm not going to go through it at length. I know that they keep on adding new models in here, but basically there's this new button up here. If you click on it, then you go over and you highlight where you want your model to be. You wait a second. I don't use this feature, or I haven't used this feature in some time, so it takes a while for it to all download. And so in this case, it's gone out to Boscoyo Studios. It's downloaded their full inventory of props that that James and his team have gone through and populated. And so I can come down here and look at these wreaths and say, yeah, okay, that looks like the wreath that I've bought. And then I can come over here. There's a bunch of details like, you know, what sort of pixels you should use and so forth. And I can just click on Insert Model and it will insert the model. And this model will have all the submodels and everything else that, that James and the team have put together to make it easy. If you download your face models, they'll come with all the face definitions and so forth. It makes custom models incredibly easy for those vendors that that have partnered with us to make their props available that way. There's a whole video I did on that. Go and watch that if you want to get more details. Number aware name sorting. So over here, you can see by default, these are all sorted by name up here. This becomes a bit of a problem, and it's not really obvious. Oh yeah, here. this is obvious here. So these are all sorted alphabetically, yet these mini trees, you can see now number 10 appears at the end, whereas previously mini tree 10 would have appeared after mini tree 1. And so now what happens, and this is true in a number of different areas in xLights, it's now aware that, hey, 10 is actually greater than 9, and it will place the models in the right order. If you had 1 at the front here and you went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, you don't have to add the leading zeros. xLights is smart enough to realize that the right sort order is to always put the number 1 at the beginning. So if you put the 0 in, that's cool. It'll still sort them properly. But if you leave them out, it's also smart enough to work that out. So test that out. There were a few issues early on with some of the performance impacts of that, but I think they're largely sorted. So we're pretty good. Correct certain scenarios with the right left arrow move, stretching, etc. So this was something that Gil did. He encountered some issues with some of the code that I'd put in place. For those of you that remember, I don't know, it was sometime last year, where we introduced and I'm not going to do all the examples. There's a video that you can go and find for this. So we introduced some keys. So if I hold down the Control Shift and press the right arrow key here, it will stretch out that model to the end of the timing track. And if you do the same thing again, it will jump it out to the end of the show. And then if I hold Control Shift and click the left arrow, okay, that didn't work. Sorry, I thought. Yeah, there it goes. I didn't select the whole thing. When I hold Control Shift and the left arrow, it stretches it out and covers the whole show. So a very quick way to stretch things, fill things out, and so forth. The other thing you can do is if you just held Control and the right arrow, actually, that was not right. Again, I didn't select the effect properly. If I hold Control and the right arrow, you can see it doesn't change the size of it, but it moves it to the next timing mark. And so I can just move it backwards and forwards by timing mark just by holding the Control key and moving the left and right arrow. And if I hold Control Shift and the left or right arrow, it stretches it out to the next timing mark. If there were effects in there, I don't know, let's throw color wash in. So if there was an effect there, and I have to separate them, and I click on this, if I hit Control left arrow, oh, it jumped over it. It's probably not even right. But if I Control Shift, it jumps back to the effect and fills in the space in between. So for those of you that can remember a whole bunch of key commands, there's some shortcut ways to very quickly manipulate some things in your show. Make the snap timing mark feature. So what this is this is something Gil introduced. He made it so that as you approach a timing mark, it will actually snap onto the timing mark. Actually, in this case, I'm holding down the Control key to let it do that. I believe he added an option up here. Yes, it's snap to timing mark. So if I set that to on, then the default behavior is as I drag an effect next to a timing mark, it will lock onto that timing mark. Now, obviously, that becomes a problem if I want to make it close to the timing mark, but not quite on it. So to temporarily either turn on if you don't have it on by default, or to turn it off if you do have it on by default, is to hold the Control key down, and that turns off, in this case, the behavior. And if I release the Control key, it anchors back on the effect, on the timing line, which makes it a lot easier when you're dragging and dropping things around. You don't have to keep zooming in and zooming out. So I think that's a really, really cool feature. So thanks, Gil. Okay, and then of course there was the second one, which was about making it an option. So that's there. Kevin did export the house preview video. This is pretty cool. Let me just quickly find, I don't know, I'm going one of my singing trees, my talking trees, sorry. No, we don't want to save the autosave one. So what Kevin's done is he's added this new option up here on the file menu, which is export the house preview as a video. Now, in order for it to work, you have to have rendered. So your sequence needs to be up to date and rendered. And then you just come up here and file export house video. You say this is going to be my talking trees.mp4. I save it. And a few seconds later, it writes out a video file into my show folder called Talking Trees 1. And if I go back into my folder here and find, oh, there it is, Talking Trees 1.mp4. If I open it up, there is my sequence. Now, notice the size of the video. That's actually, I'll stop that. So that's actually the size of this down here. So if you made this full screen, if I made my house preview full screen, before I did the save, it will obviously save a much larger video file because the dimensions are taken from the size of this preview. So if you want it small, make it small, then save it. If you want it big, fill the screen up and then save it. So that's very cool. Sure beats hell out of screen recording just because you want to save a video of your show, and it also guarantees that the audio and all the lights are all in sync. So very cool. Added support for the S5 clipboard file format. So for those of you that have LOR, you would no doubt be familiar that if you right click here, you can export a model. When you export a model, you can go in here and choose an LCB file, which is a law clipboard. Well, now there's a new option here for the S5 format. So if you've upgraded to the law S5 product and you want to do some effect generation in xLights and take it back and paste it into your new S5, you can still do that. So you can still take advantage of some of the effects which are unique to xLights and still use it in law if law is your primary sequencer or you prefer it as a show player or whatever. We continue to support these other sequences and try to make it easier for you to move backwards and forwards and do what best suits you rather than trying to force everyone into our ecosystem and to do things the way we want to do things. I talked about this one in the video last night on the scheduler. Dan, as part of his updates, and I can't remember, there was one of these changes here, I can't remember which one it was, that kind of needed him to step up an OS X version, and after a bit of discussion, he decided that he was going to go to version 10.10, which is now the minimum version of OS X you need to be running in order to use version 2018.2 or above of xLights. And Dan also added a house model preview and play controls to the touch bar. So when Apple introduced the touch bar on the laptops, I know it was a year or so ago now, one of the things that Dan produced just uniquely for that machine was the ability to have a set of icons on the touch bar that was specific to xLights, and he's obviously extended them. I don't have them here, so I can't really demonstrate them. Dan did make a video of this. It's at least 18 months old. I'm sure it's on the videos.xlights.org site. If you want to go and look for it, do a search for touch bar or Macintosh or something. I don't know, OS X maybe. Display tooltip of the current effect being rendered in the render progress dialog. This is actually pretty cool because every now and then, particularly if you're doing a big sequence, and I'm actually going to go and open up one of my slower to render sequences. I think one of the ones with the holiday sequences in it are a bit slow because they've got so much going on. So when you're rendering, sometimes things get a bit slow, and you know when people start to report these problems, that would go away, so I can actually get to the status bar down here. Hang on. I just have to resize this slightly. Okay. All right, now I can see the status bar. Okay, so when I click render, as many of you would know, of course that bloody locked in. I can double click on here and bring up the render progress dialog, and some of the things here render a bit slowly. And so if it seems to get stuck, etc., you can bring your mouse up here, and if you hold your mouse over the things, it will tell you what effects are actually being rendered. Now this is actually progressing reasonably quickly, so it keeps flashing up and showing you different things. But if it got stuck, or it got to a particular point and it seemed to be doing things forever, you could come in here, hold your mouse over the slider, so over the progress bar, and see exactly which effect is causing all of the grief. And that would help you identify, well, maybe there's something wrong with that. Maybe I've gone and put a liquid effect in, and sometimes some of the settings on the liquid effect can get you into a bit of trouble, and it can take a long time to render, or even get stuck. There are the number of parameters there, and the interplay of them all are not entirely bulletproof, and occasionally you can get yourself into a bit of trouble. And so that's kind of useful at times if you're having problems rendering and you want to understand what's going on. Fix the default model start channel to always be one after the channel model with the highest ending channel. So this is, if I go here and I add a new model now, because I obviously built this display some time ago, and if I was to use, in the older versions, if I was to go in here and to add a new star, okay, and there it is. What it used to do each time you did this in a new session is it would just put this first star at channel 1. So the first channel, and then as I drop more and more things, it would then chain them onto the end of this star. Now the problem with that is obviously there's already some bunch of stuff that started at channel 1, and so all of these models would then go into xLights as basically overlapping models, and I'd have no end of trouble. But if you sort this thing by start channel, you'll find that that new star has actually been added to the end and is guaranteed, in this case, not to overlap. So if it's just not enough room here. It's just way too much going on. So you can see that the previous model ended at 51672, and this is obviously 51673. So basically, when I dropped that new model in, xLights automatically made sure that that model did not overlap with everything. Now, of course, that may not actually map to any channels in my setup tab. I'd still have to go and fix that up. So this is not a solve all the world problems type thing. But what it does do is it minimizes the probability that you're going to have a whole bunch of overlapping channels, and when you start to drop effects on it, all of a sudden you're going to see weird things going on. And we get a lot of cases, or a lot of people, asking questions around, well, I don't understand why this happens. I drop an effect, and it's usually because they've done some modeling, closed xLights, opened it up, added some more models, and created all of these overlapping channels. And this will ideally or hopefully minimize how often that happens. So that's what that's all about. The image model. So the image model I actually demonstrated. It's kind of a little bit hard for me to do here, but basically it's the one bit of color in all of the buttons across here is this image model. You click on it again, as ever, you drag. It kind of looks a little bit different. It's got this image background, but you come over to here, you click here, and you need to choose an image. Now, do I have a Santa in here or something? Yeah, there you go. GIFs aren't spectacular. Let's use a PNG for it. And so what it's done is it's drawn this picture of Santa, which is taken from a PNG file, as a model. Now, these models are just single channel models. So you really, in fact, I don't even think I let you choose anything else but single channels. So the place that you use this, this might be my blow up Santa. And rather than, as I've done here with a lot of my other dumb models, I've just put a dot. Now instead, and this dot here is actually my blow up Santa. There he is, there, my blow up Santa. So what I can do is I can have this thing as my blow up Santa, and if I go to sequence it, and I go down, he's probably at the bottom. Is he at the bottom? Where's it'd be called image? Now I've got to find him. There he is. See how he's there? So what I can do is I can, I don't know, just take an on effect and I drop it on and he turns up. He's a bit pixelated. He's not a very high resolution Santa. But if I set that effect to start at 0, you can see how, it starts black and that he comes up until he's fully on. If I had a few cycle counts in there, he'll, 101 cycles seems a little bit impractical. 4. And so you can see how as he comes on and off, the image gets brighter and brighter. So if you've got a bunch of blow-ups in your display, maybe you've got, you know, I've got a wireframe, you know, single channel incandescent reindeer, you know, I can have a picture of that, or just a picture that represents a reindeer, and I'll know that, hey, that's it. And it'll obviously be a little bit more obvious than here, where I can tell you that dot there happens to be my incandescent reindeer. These two dots here are two moving head reindeers. This thing here is actually a green rope light tree. You could never tell that, right, just by looking at this. But with a bunch of these colored images, you can see exactly what I'm sequencing, and gives you a much better feel for what your show is going to look like. Allow you to rotate handle to spin the DMX model within 3D mode. There's actually a couple of changes that Gil's made to the DMX model. So if I move this into 3D mode, which is this one here, you can see Gil's given you the ability to actually now, you know, I don't know, mount your light on an angle. I guess I'm not entirely sure how often you do that. I'd be a little worried about them falling off my roof if I mounted them on the angle like that. But either way, Gil's allowed you to do that. While I'm at it, I'll mention the fact that Gil has also added a floodlight model. So this is a true floodlight model. Now, it's basically, we've talked about how to model floodlights in the past and how you do that with the single line model. Ooh, it's a bit weird, isn't it? Got Santa there. Don't know why that happened. Anyway, but by using the DMX model, this lets you use things like DMX floods, where, you know, instead of just being a pure 3-channel model, there might be 4 or 5 channels, there might be a shutter, there might even be a strobe, etc. in it. And this obviously allows you to model that floodlight and represent it more accurately for those DMX floods. So yeah, don't know what happened to that. Okay, all right. Add a select row. Okay, so this is from Scott. Scott's been contributing a number of different things over the last few releases. Select row effects in the sequencer. So the way this works here is if I wanted to select all the effects in a row, I can come in here and, where is it? It's probably not there because there's no effects there. Let me go here. There it is. There it is. So select row effects. And so if I had multiple effects across here, it would select all of those effects that were on that row. Let me go and open up a proper sequence. Talking trees 1, discard. There it is. Okay, so if I wanted to come here and select all the effects on the row, I can do that. That's interesting. He hasn't highlighted them. I have to look at that too. You can also do it at the layer level as well, and that will select those effects on that layer. Pretty sure it does work though, but I have to look at that one as well. So many things I have to look at. The image model, I did some funky things too. All right, Control A to select all the sequences. So being over here, I just press the Control and the A key, and there you see it actually did in that case select all of the effects in the sequence. Kind of useful now that we have things like bulk editing, where, you know, you might want to go over and set the brightness on everything, or one of the other properties which are common across all models. So being able to press Control A and then go over and, where's the brightness? The sparkles. If I bulk edit it and say, yep, check it on, and I've just turned sparkles on all of those effects. So it's one of those things that makes bulk edit a little bit easy. And there's some render optimizations. In fact, I left this one in here. There's actually a few places or a few times in the last few releases where some render optimizations and some load optimizations have been done just to make xLights a little bit more snappy where we find them. Magic fixes for overlapping channels and illegal start channels. This kind of sounds cool, right? let's imagine for the moment that for some reason I set this start channel to 1. And so obviously that star, which is going to appear at the top of the list now, is an overlapping start channel. And let's go to this one here, and let's make this illegal, right? Let's I don't know, let's chain it to a non-existent model. And of course it gives me an error, and you can see here that it's got an error because it's got the 3 stars in front of it. Now the 1's not an error, but it does overlap. And so there's now these right-click menus here where you can come in and you can say, make the start channel not overlapping. You can make all start channels valid, but not necessarily not overlapping, and you can then do both. That's right. Make start channel. Sorry. Let me get this right. So make start channels not overlapping only works on the model that you've selected. If you make all start channels not overlapping, it will go through the entire set of models and make them all not overlap. And the make all start channels valid will ignore the overlapping models, because sometimes you do want overlapping channels. And instead what it will do is it will just seek out all of these invalid channels and fix them up. So let's do that first. Let's make everything, make all start channels valid. And we're looking for our driveway rows middle. And you see it's disappeared, and if it's appeared down the bottom here, and it's chained it to the last model, which guarantees that it's both a valid channel and it's obviously not overlapping. If I want to get rid of the overlapping channels, so remember these are overlapping. In fact, there's a few channels in here that are overlapping. So let's just do this one. I can come in here and say, make that start channel not overlapping. It gives me a warning because obviously this is going to do it. This will make your start channel valid and not overlapping. It will not magically make your start channel right. And what that means is, well, you're still going to have to map this correctly to your controller, etc. It doesn't fix all of that problem. And this warning's kind of here because I worry that people think that it's going to solve everything. It's suddenly going to magically work on their controllers, and it's not. But it is going to solve one class of problems, and that is it's going to stop it from being overlapping. And so there it is down there, magically safe. So that's that one. Add the ability to include multiple timings in a single X timing file. What does that mean? Well, basically here I've got 2 sets of lyrics in this particular track. Now you've always been able to export the timing track. And I can say matrix tree timing, export it and save it. And because it's got multiple timing tracks in here, before it actually writes it out, it says, well, are you sure you need to select which ones you want to do, because you actually may want to send more than one out. And in this case, well, that's interesting. In this case, it's got it wrong because it hasn't shown the one. So the first 2 are timing tracks, but the second, the third, the rest of them are actually not timing tracks. They are the top models. It's a bit odd. When you make a video, you find the bugs. Let's try it again. Export timing track. Yeah, that'll do. Yep, no, it's failed. Anyway, the concept is that you can actually export multiple timing tracks into a single X timing file, and that way when you share it, you get all of the lyric tracks. And obviously, I am going to have to look at that one because that didn't work. All right. Fix the arches model. Look, I mentioned this one. Normally I don't touch on fixes, but there was a problem if you switched around the starting location from green square to blue square and started to drop effects onto an arches model like this. You actually got some slightly unusual behavior that wasn't intended, and that's now been fixed. The downside of it is obviously if you were relying on that incorrect behavior in your old sequences may be broken. It really only impacts on you if, like this one here, I've got multiple arches in a single model. If you have separate arches like I have here over my driveway, that's obviously not a big deal and won't make any difference. So that's the only reason I mentioned it. Randomize settings, okay. So we've long been able to randomize, create random effects. Okay, it's interesting as well. Just by going into here and go and create random effects. So there's a couple of things that have changed here. Now, there were some real issues previously with random effects where while it would randomly choose an effect, it actually didn't randomize any of the settings. And so this has now been fixed because it's actually meant to randomize the settings, which it now does. If you don't want the settings to be randomized, you can click on the locks over here and lock them up, and that will cause them not to be changed from that value. You can also, here, there's this new randomize icon that Craig's introduced, where you can actually take a particular model. So let's click on the spinner. Let's move it a little bit to the side so that we can actually see it, which is a little bit hard to do. All right, so there it is there. It's spinning around. And so what we can do is come in here and we can say, look, I don't want you to randomize the thickness or the speed, but I want you to randomize everything else. And so the thickness and the speed stayed the same, but the other properties were randomly chosen, and you can keep trying that a few times. Actually, it's not respecting. Oh God, it's another thing not working. Oh no. Sorry, no, it is working. It is holding on to the thickness and the speed. But all the other parameters are moving around appropriately. And so you get to choose how random these things become. So that's what that one's all about. Almost there. Second last release. Add waveform colors to the color manager. Not sure how many people realize the color manager's there. Gil made a video on it last year, but basically a lot of the colors that you see on the screen here, you can actually customize. And I've now added it so that you can customize this waveform area of the screen. You can change what color the waveform is and the background and the selected waveform. And this is playing up because that should be not there. But anyway, we'll close that sequence. Discard changes. It's very strange. All right, so that's what that one's about. Add some coarse grain volume controls to the audio menu. So if you come up here to the audio menu, you now have this loud, medium, quiet, and very quiet. I decided against giving you a slider that gave you very fine level control. At the end of the day, you know, most people aren't playing their show out of xLights, they're just using it. And quite frankly, the main reason I added it was so that people could choose very quiet when they were on Zoom and sharing the audio from xLights, because it has a tendency to blare out and drown out everything that else is that's said. So there's just those really coarse level controls. I have no plans of going back and giving you a slider where you can set the precise volume. I personally just don't think that's necessary. And so it ain't going to happen until someone can make a damn good case for why it should. Of course, the scheduler, which is where you play your show, does have that sort of fine level control. Fix face centered not working all the time. So what this one here is when you're in your face definitions and you've got a matrix definition like this, I think by default it's centered, but it actually wasn't working as centered. It was actually largely working as scaled. And so I've actually gone in and fixed that so it does work as centered. But I mention it because many of you would have this as centered when they actually wanted scaled, but because the centered was acting like scaled, you never would have changed it. So if you experience a situation where your faces are suddenly too big or too small, and should be scaled, you'll have to come in and fix this parameter up, because it's obviously, it's now doing what it's meant to be doing, but you may have had the wrong value in there and you'll need to fix it up. But it's not a big deal. And it's only February. I'm sure you got plenty of time. Oh, it's actually March. You got plenty of time. Add the ability to lock effects. So oh, no, we haven't talked about that. So let's open up a sequence. No. All right. What this lets you do is you can come in here, you can highlight a bunch of effects, right click on it and say lock the effects. And you can see, hopefully, that when you click on the effects now, these effects are in red. And if I click and I try and move it, or I hold the Control Shift and right arrows, these effects are not going anywhere. Okay, so the beauty of this is, and you know where you'd want to use this is one of those holiday sequences import. You get thousands of effects in there, and you're always, I don't know about you, but I'm always worried that I'm accidentally going to touch one and move it a little bit or stretch it a little bit, and it just won't look right. And there's no way I could ever fix it up again without going back and re-importing it. So now you can go in, take advantage. Let's go down a bit. Take advantage of this. You can say, you know, select the row effects, right click, lock them, and obviously now when I click on it, it should be, no, it didn't lock. That thing's not working. So yeah, so the idea is yeah, you can grab them all, or I can just grab every effect, which I did by pressing Control A, and lock it. And now, no matter what I do, I'm not going to accidentally move the effects around. Now, to be clear, this does not prevent you from changing the effect. I can still come over here and change the cycle count and a whole bunch of other properties. What I can't do is I can't move them on the grid, accidentally stretch them or anything like that. I also can't move it up or down. It's locked in place on the grid from any sort of mouse movement, but everything else you can still edit. So hopefully that helps you, stops you making mistakes and having to press Control Z, etc. The Matrix Facedown Loader, this has been somewhat done to death. A whole bunch of people have made videos on this, particularly with all the work that's going on at the moment to do a whole bunch of lyric tracks. So I'm not going to go back over that. Suffice it to say, when I was pointing at this Faces model and I pointed this download images, you basically have the ability, give it a second, to come into here, and there's well over 100 in here. So you come in, you choose your category, you choose your face, and you can just click Insert Face, and it will download it and attach it to your tree or your matrix or whatever. Please be very careful and watch the width and the height. You will find that the width and height that you choose make a big difference. So this boy elf up here, this is 302 pixels wide by 584 high. My matrix is only 18 pixels high, right? So that's going to be divided almost by a factor of 20. So how big's that mouth going to be when it's been divided by a factor of 20? Answer is pretty much not very big at all. So I'm not sure that this model is going to be particularly useful to me on this matrix. But that Minion, look, is only 16 or 50 high. So it's only going to divide that by, you know, a factor of 2 or 3, and the width, it's a lot wider. So he'd sit reasonably centered in the middle, and maybe, you know, with the appropriate positioning, I can make him look reasonably good. He definitely worked really well on my 16 by 50 megatree, where he's perfectly sized for. So watch carefully those sizes. There is also this filter unsuitable faces. It's not really used at the moment, but there is the ability for people to say, hey, that particular Frankenstein model, it's only good for certain size props. There's a minimum size prop that you have to have, and it will then filter out anything that's unsuitable if you tried to use it. So anyway, we'll leave that at that. Like I said, there's another video I made which demoed it, and I won't go over it all again. Adding a new law output. Again, I think Gil definitely mentioned it. I think he made a video as well. So he's added this add law. You can still add a law controller up here. This is our old school law controller. It will work with your law controllers. The downside of it is that the protocol that it uses in speaking to your law controller is a fairly basic version of the protocol. It's got a lot of overhead. It will work for maybe up to about 96 channels, and once you get beyond 96 channels at 115,200 baud, after that, it basically will get a bit laggy and not that useful. So Gil introduced this new type, this law type, and this is a first class protocol where you get to go in and you actually have to define each of your controller types. The beauty of this is it adds support for some of the Pixie controllers and the CCR and CCB controllers. And so with the higher channel counts that those controllers involve, you need a protocol that's more efficient, and the protocol that Gil's implemented and reverse engineered behind this is good enough to drive those controllers. It doesn't do everything. There is just some things that are fundamentally the nature of what we do, which means that it can't do everything. But it does a fair bit of it, and you will find that you will get reasonably good performance in a lot of scenarios. There are some scenarios where, look, to be honest, it's still going to struggle. There are still challenges with running large numbers of pixels over a serial network, even when you pump the speed of the network up, and even when you try to encode the data to minimize the amount of data that is sent. If you were to throw a butterfly over a large number of channels on a single law network, it's going to struggle because every single pixel is different and every single pixel changes every single frame, and the law protocol just has lots and lots of overhead when that's the case. But if you're throwing a bars effect or a simple on or a ramp effect, it's incredibly efficient. It would use very, very little data to actually control an entire prop. The way you do it here is you go in, add a 16-channel controller. As usual, you get to choose what sort of protocol and everything, create a description, and you get a controller here. You can then go and add another one. Now you're adding all of these controllers on one law network. So this is on the COM4 network. So there I'm going to have a law dongle attached to my PC. It's going to show up as COM4, and I'm going to add as many controllers in here as I need. Now, if you have multiple controllers that share the same unit ID, my understanding is that you only need to add them once. And those controllers are smart enough that they will pull the same data off the law network. So don't go in here and create multiple of them. So yeah, and that will appear way down here at the bottom. There's my law optimized on COM4 controller. So that's that one. Check sequences, defects dropped on strand submodels and models with no nodes. I don't know if I really need to go into this, but basically it's possible for you to create, in certain circumstances, a strand that contains no nodes. A classic example of this, if I was to take this polyline here and take segment 2 here, because if I look at my individual segments, there's segment 2, it's got 64 pixels. If I was to make that 0, it would have 0 pixels, and basically it shows up as a gap on the model here. When I sequence it, however, I could in theory still drop an effect on strand 2, but there's 0 pixels in there, and so it won't error, but it also won't do anything. And so I've now got check sequence so that it will go through your sequence. And if it finds one of these circumstances where you've got, a segment on a polyline, or maybe you've got a submodel that you've created, but for whatever reason, the way you defined it, it didn't actually grab any nodes, and so therefore it's empty submodel, and you drop any effects on that, I will find them and highlight them and tell you that, hey, you've got this effect on this strand here and there's no nodes, so it's not going to do anything, which you may or may not care about. I think it comes up as a warning, although I could be wrong. Might be an error. Rework the window frame model. Okay, so this may be another breaking change. It's that time of year. So you've all seen the window frame model here. Okay, great for doors and windows and the like. Historically, this model has only really worked in clockwise. The only time it worked in anti-clockwise was I don't know, when it was a door and you started in the bottom right-hand corner, it would then go anti-clockwise. But in all other circumstances, it would only ever go clockwise. So I've added some more parameters here, and now you get to choose the start location, but you also get to choose how it goes around, either clockwise or counterclockwise. So if I set it counterclockwise from the bottom left, so the bottom left is down here. Counterclockwise means it's going to come across here, up here, and around. And so, as ever, the node layout's a great way to see this. And if I scroll down to the bottom, there it is. There's node 1, and it's round. It's going counterclockwise around. Now, you can get yourself into, not trouble, but that you can create some rather unusual things that you don't really mean. So for instance, if I was to say this is a door and I have no pixels on the bottom, but I've set it to start at bottom left and go counterclockwise, and I was to do my node layout, again, as you would expect, bottom left, there's node 1, but what do you know, node 2's over here on the right. It's technically correct. You said you wanted it started here, but you said you wanted it to go around counterclockwise. But of course, there's not a person on the planet that's going to wire a door up that way. But xLights won't stop you doing it, and it will do its best to respect it. So look, there's a couple of people out there that may find that some of their models break as a result of this. For those people, I apologize. It's more likely to happen with people that have done doors that are wired counterclockwise. I think they're probably the most likely to break. But if they do, it's a pretty easy fix. There's really only these 2 parameters that you have to reselect and get them right, and hopefully you'll be all good. And for all those people out there that do wire their windows counterclockwise, they're all laughing and saying how wonderful it is. So I guess we just have to suck that one up. Increase color curve and value curve resolution. What does this mean? Well, basically, let's do a color curve. You've always had the ability to come in here and add color curve points. It used to be that there were only 40 distinct points at which you could place these color things. I've increased it to 100. So that gives you much finer control. One of the things that people may not have noticed that appeared last year is, where are we? We'll go here again. Is that you can actually now see the timing marks when you come into here. And so by giving you finer resolution, it makes it easier for you to place these marks exactly or as close as possible onto the timing marks and give yourself a much better representation. Get rid of the random. So you can see how these things now are occurring closer to, not perfectly on, but definitely closer to the timing marks. And that happens because I've given you that greater resolution that you can define. Okay, we're almost there. Add the effect select panel. So this is Scott's pride and joy. It also goes similar to the Control A and everything for selecting effects. If you come up to the View menu, go down to Windows, there's now a new thing called Select Effect. And here it is here. And in it you get, and this version here is .6, so there is an error that does occasionally appear here, and I'll show you that in a second as well. So if I want to select, I don't know, all my on effects. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put .star in here and just select everything to start with. I want all my models. I don't care what model they're on. And I'm going to select all my on effects. Oops, that was not what I wanted. Sorry. Ooh, Scott, looks like you've got a problem, mate. Okay. All right, let's go back in again. No, the last thing I want to do is keep all that rubbish that I was working on. Okay, so let's go in and pick a song. All right, let's go to View, Windows, select Effect. I don't know, what happens if I type on in here? It's interesting. So dot stars, oops, sorry, dot star is everything. So we'll do that. We'll select everything. We'll select all models. Here you can specify the start and end time. So it basically lets you slice it out and say, look, I only care about effects that occur between a certain time. Let's select all the on effects. I did it again. Sorry, I shouldn't have done that. That was my fault. One more time for the dummies. No. View, Windows, select effect. All right. So dot star, search, select all my models. Okay, that looks more like it. Not quite sure whether, the 30 is coming from the timing marks. Probably shouldn't be selecting that. But I can select all my garlands effects, and you can see over here my garlands effect have been selected. Now, why would you want to do that? Well, clearly it's because I want to be able to do things like bulk edit. So if I wanted to change all of my garlands here, what's it doing? Okay. Sorry. It's interesting. Sorry, for some reason it won't let me bulk edit. A few problems here that I need to work on. All right, well, the idea was that you would be able to come in here and bulk edit the things and have selected everything, either all effects between certain time intervals or select all effects of a certain type or whatever it happens to be that you wanted to do. At least that's where that one's going. It looks like there's a few wrinkles we need to work on with that. And finally, Gil's enhancement around the DMX head beams. And what he's really saying there is, if I go back to my layout, if I throw a DMX effect down, okay, you can see how it draws the beam coming out here in the sequencer. Basically what Gil's saying there is when he turns it off, he actually wants the beam to go off. And that's probably not going to work, to be honest. I haven't set all the channels up for it. But basically what he's saying is that the beam here will be drawn as black when it's actually black. I'd have to go and set all the channels up, and I don't have a DMX head set up. So, but that's the concept, because otherwise what it does is, while it will show the beam churning into different colors, I don't believe it was showing it going black and actually turning the beam off when it was black. Instead, it was leaving it white, which is not really representative of what's going on. So that's it. A few a few things that we encountered along the way that I'm now going to have to go back and fix, but make sure we highlight those. But a whole bunch of changes. It's early in the year. We're really only a couple of months in. And that's taken me over an hour to go through just a month's worth of changes. Looking forward to some xLights training around the Christmas Expo, where we'll have a chance to take people through a lot more detail and really cut through some things that are kind of difficult to explain in Zoom and recordings. So looking forward to that, guys. Thanks.